Welcome back, everyone, to Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, but you probably know us as AISA. I'm your host, as always, David Savva-Willett, and today I am joined by Andrew Haschka, Field CTO for Asia Pacific and Japan at GitLab. Andrew has spent more than 2 decades across cybersecurity, cloud, and digital transformation, with prior leadership roles at Google and VMware, and a track record of advising enterprises and governments across the region on how to deliver software securely and at speed. Right now, almost every enterprise in Australia is wrestling with the same question: how do we let our developers move faster with AI without flooding production with vulnerabilities we can't keep up with? Andrew sits at the center of that conversation, and that's what we're here to unpack today. Andrew, welcome to Cyber Voices.
Thank you so much, David. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. This one's been an exciting one in my calendar for a while. But, for listeners who haven't met you yet, and also for me, because I'm just getting to know you too, can you tell us a bit about your career and a little bit of the flavor of what a field CTO at an organization at GitLab does from day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we'll take a step back from today and go backwards in time. But I spent a lot of time meeting CIOs and CTOs and CISOs for organizations across the region. I cover Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, India, Japan, and Korea. And all of those cultural intricacies and the way that businesses operate in these countries is typically part of that dialogue that I'll need to have with them around transformation. Transformation around delivering software and innovation to their customers, transformation around security and compliance, and now transformation around leveraging AI for their organization and governing that effectively. So I think one of the biggest areas of focus that I've had with CISOs and CIOs alike is trying to provide more of a transformational path beyond the technology. How do we maybe reflect on changes that could benefit the culture or the process that these organizations follow to deliver outcomes and generate revenue? And so in many cases, we need to understand the breadth of what they're doing in order to map out what could be better. And I would say that that is possibly the best starting point for most organizations, just being able to talk through that more evolutionary path and getting to more of that vision of where enterprises are headed today. Now, before that, I was at Google, where I looked after portfolios aligned with cybersecurity for platform and application security, also DevOps and software delivery, and similarly doing roles of that type at VMware across the region as well. So a lot of time traveling across the region. I've visited 78 countries thus far. And yeah, it's given me a whole bunch of interesting context in all these meetings I'm having at the moment.
Yeah, something you said just then I found really interesting was, just getting people to establish that baseline of where they are and where they need to go. Sometimes, do you think that, and maybe I'm speaking from my own experience here too, as a CISO, we get so bogged down in just all of the fires that happen in our day jobs that it becomes really quite difficult for them to see, like, hey, we actually have a baseline that we can build on. It's just we need to take that step back sometimes and go, yep, here's where we are. Here's what the plan needs to be. Is that where bringing someone in like yourself kind of just gives people that kind of headspace a little bit?
Yeah, I think providing a bit of perspective and context around what other CISOs are doing in other organizations is hugely valuable. I met with a CISO in Philippines recently for a financial organization. And he said his main objective for the year was to turn off the tap of vulnerabilities running in production, because primarily his team was focused on managing what was running in production and triaging the number of vulnerabilities that they needed to remediate. Now, in many cases, if we can prevent new influx of vulnerabilities heading into production, that solves for what a lot of CISOs are typically gold on, vulnerabilities running in production. But I think we can be much more intentional in the way that that's done. And we'll maybe unpack that a lot as we go through this session today. But I think in many cases, we're needing to rethink how organizations do security and rethink maybe what are some of the new and imposing threats that are coming in with some of the newer technologies like AI perhaps and the new ways of operating in the way that teams may be leveraging AI to deliver production-based outcomes.
And I did write down turn off the tap vulnerabilities in production just then, because I think that's a really interesting quote and quite one that resonates probably with most of us. But I feel like, well, that's a tap you could probably never turn all the way off. At least you could maybe hope that it would just be a light trickle.
Or a couple of drips, perhaps, but at least having more control over
Yeah, exactly.
on your customer environments.
It sounds like everyone, AI is where the conversation is shifting a lot with your conversations with customers at the moment. It sounds like you're dealing with people who are probably doing things like AI coding assistance as well. And they're now in the hands of developers across most large Australian organizations and around the world. Yeah, from what you're seeing and from the conversations you're having, where is this going well? And where is it quietly creating new security risk? Where's the tap being turned off and then maybe leaking somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that there's typically a convergence across every industry vertical that I'm engaging with. Executives are all noticing the same challenge and asking that same question. How do they let their developers write code faster, deliver code at higher volumes, and typically reduce the impact on the broader business? I think if we consider the volumes of code that are now being written with AI coding tools and agents, I would say vulnerabilities are exponentially increasing for a lot of organizations that I've spoken with. And we're framing this the AI paradox. It's essentially, one part of the journey is maybe quicker in coding, perhaps, but the flow-on effects from that in testing, in security validation, in compliance checks, in build and release are potentially much more slower than they were before because the team size is the same and the volume is higher for those teams. And so I think the AI paradox is something that is very important for organizations to solve for. Developers often tell me that they're maybe 20, if not 50% more productive when coding with AI assistance. I guess as we all are when we use AI to maybe write documentation or write test plans or evaluate security policy. But I do think we need to understand where a lot of that code may be coming from for these developers. In many cases, the AI agents aren't creating this code from scratch of their own volition. It comes from the internet. And not everything that has been curated on the internet is secure by design or by nature. And so trying to reduce some of those downstream bottlenecks in code review, in testing, in security scanning, in deployment is probably one of the key focus areas for a lot of these leaders that I speak to. And we really need to think about, well, how do we solve for this in a more strategic way? And I think being able to have some form of intent and some policy and a system of record that is traceable is foundationally so important now. And too many organizations that I speak to have a very fragmented way of operating. They've got different tools and processes and teams handing off from one to the next and potentially even daisy chaining one tool to the next without having any centralized integration layer. And I think it's really difficult to go and adopt secure AI governance and practices if you don't have that system of record to start. And if you don't then evolve to having a knowledge graph to go and service those AI prompts and those agentic queries that are happening. And so I think in many cases, just taking a step back and thinking about the more foundational aspects of software delivery and how we can layer in more secure, compliant, and governance-based factors in their journey is pretty paramount at the moment.
It's sort of the same problem that we've kind of always had with code development, that pipeline and how you test and how you capture potential risks and vulnerabilities as it moves through the life cycle. Or if you're using an AI to assist you with your coding, just grabbing best practice information that it's researched much faster than you probably could have on the internet. But in the past, you knew where you were pulling it down from. Is it just accelerating the same set of problems that already existed? Is that a fair way to put it?
I would say that typically there is a very consumerized way of how individuals within organizations are using AI at work, but also in the same sense in their personal lives. And I think this consumerization in the use of AI without these governance, without these controls, without your role-based access control, and I guess intent for using an AI agent for a specific outcome, rather than providing an AI platform to any consumer and saying, look, you can ask it whatever you want, which seems to be the sentiment of the pain that a lot of organizations are going through right now. In many cases, I'm seeing sprawled access to AI in the same way that cloud sprawl occurred, or DevOps or cybersecurity tool has sprawled over time. And there needs to be a simplification and a consolidation. And I would say, typically, what I'm seeing in the acceleration of using AI-based coding systems is they operate in a microcosm. They operate in their own silo. They've only got context for the limited requirements that they've been given. And in many cases, when they're generating the code, they don't put in those governance controls that many enterprises have adopted over decades. Things like, valid and appropriate testing for SLAs and stability and reliability, being able to ensure that you have adequate security and vulnerability scanning, from static application security testing or dynamic or API scanning or dependency scanning, fuzz testing, many different things that are left behind when we're just creating code with some of these agents. And then being able to validate, look, we know what our organizational policy is, and we know what our regulators want from a compliance policy point of view. How have we baked that in to go and check and validate that what has been written actually passes the test with regards to compliance before we go and release that? And so I think we need to take a step back from leveraging AI for code suggestions in a very consumerized way and think more holistically around how we can have a bit more balance in how we do that, not just leverage AI for coding, but also have it to optimize quality requirements, maybe in the planning phase, going from business ideation before it gets to the developer, or being able to maybe evolve the test plan that needs to be written to ensure we have adequate coverage, or maybe having a security or a compliance-based agent to be much more proactive on evaluating what the risk is based on what's been written and who the organization is and what the consumer is yet to see. So all of these things, I think, need to be very holistic at the moment. And I think a lot of CISOs are considering how they can influence some of those activities to date beyond just letting the developer activity run its own race, putting in those guardrails and those golden paths and that intent to centralize access and consolidate how these AI agents are being leveraged, and the evolution to flows, I guess, being able to deliver the end-to-end outcome by policy and, I guess, defined upfront before it's being used.
Okay, listeners, we need to talk about CyberCon 2026, and more specifically, how much money you could be saving right now. Early bird registrations for the Australian Cyber Conference are open, and they close on Monday, the 30th of June. And here's what that means in real terms. If you're an AISA member, a full 3-day Gold Pass is just $899 right now during the early bird special. That's a $480 saving off the full price 3-day Gold Pass for members just for registering right now. If you're not a member yet, early bird is currently $1,485, which is a $1,200 saving on the full price non-member ticket. And this isn't just any conference pass. A Gold Pass includes the full 3 days of Australia's leading cybersecurity conference, networking drinks, and the legendary CyberCon block party, all in Melbourne from the 14th to 16th of October 2026. But the date to remember right now is June 30th, because after that the prices do go up. So register now at cyberconference.com.au. That's cyberconference.com.au. We'll see you there. And on that topic of being able to, discover the vulnerabilities that are being introduced, turning off the tap, so to speak, you've talked publicly about the arms race between defenders shipping AI-assisted code and attackers using AI to find vulnerabilities. How should Australian CISOs be thinking about that balance? I ask selfishly.
I was speaking to a few CISOs in Australia and New Zealand recently, actually. And I think if we frame this in the context of maybe being a defender in an organization whose AI system understands the specific code base for what they've delivered to the customer, the threat model, the compliance posture, it's very, I guess, beneficial for them in identifying any issues that maybe a more generic attacker side AI will miss because it doesn't have that context. It doesn't understand from that business ideation what was actually being created and what was built before. What were the prior releases? What were, I guess, the intent for what was being built? And I guess, what were the inputs that led that AI engine to go and perform those tasks, to deliver those outcomes? And so I think there is a defender's advantage when that knowledge graph and system of record exists from a CISO point of view. I think also being able to consider that maybe centralizing the way that individuals leverage AI is possibly the most critical way to reduce risk from an Australian CISO's point of view. So instead of saying, look, we've got maybe 5 different AI platforms that we'd like to use, and everyone's going individually to those prompts or those chat interfaces to go and ask that question, instead we're going to change that up a bit. And we're going to put more governance and control around this is what these individuals should be using that agent for. This is, I guess, when and how they should be accessing. This is how we're going to provide some level of provenance and traceability around the inputs, the outputs, the reasoning, the model used in order to have that defender's advantage on understanding how AI was used and the potential impact that we need to go and address or protect our organization from. And so I think culture and process definitely needs to be optimized as part of this. I was speaking to a CISO earlier in the week, actually, and he said there is an evolution now in moving from the more generic access of AI in favor of maybe humans are the driving force. But maybe in 12 months' time, the agentic flow is going to be in the driver's seat. And maybe humans in the loop, or humans as the architect, or humans as that governor of those agents managing agents is the outcome that some organizations are expecting will land fairly soon. And so having a policy-driven approach to that is actually hugely important. I think it will build resilience in the way that organizations operate, and it'll help maybe curate a lot of what we need to go and validate and, I guess, review before we go and run in production.
And I love the sheer volume of just sort of existential kind of discussions that people are having around AI, like that one that you just kind of said, because we still really we haven't hit the peak. We're still on the precipice. I think there's a lot of people who go, myself included. I think I went really all in on how I was using AI at work, and then probably was leaning on it a bit too much. And I noticed this is not quite the quality that I expect from myself that I'm outputting, right? And then had to just find that nice balance. And I imagine people who, no matter what they're using it for, are still having to find that balance too. And it's, I guess, the sky's the limit in terms of where we could actually be going. When it comes to securing software supply chains, what does that look like in an AI-assisted world, though? And what's the gap between where most enterprises are today and where they need to be?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the realm of salsa, not with guacamole, but supply chain levels for software artifacts. And I would say that foundationally, organizations maybe cut themselves a little short in that maybe they just look to their CI tool to go and evaluate the salsa leveling that they have for their build. But I think supply chain security and foundational supply chain principles need to be quite holistic. We need to think about integrity and attestation and hermeticity and provenance and traceability and all these things that contribute to a strong supply chain and how we build software for our consumers. I would say as we move into an AI-assisted world and potentially an AI intent-driven world, where we define the intent and we have the entire outcome from start to finish being delivered with multiple agents in the formal flow, those frameworks and those policies are so much more important because we're providing the guardrails that those agents will operate within. I think historically, when we were largely a human-led software delivery factory in many organizations, there was a lot more focus from the individual on what had worked well, what didn't work well, what were some of the risks that they noticed in prior builds. And in many cases, when we're leveraging AI assistants to go and write code or potentially deliver tests or do some form of security validation, maybe a lot of that context that previously we used to have does not land in the prompt that we ask that AI agent to deliver. And so often the level of quality that we may see without those guardrails and without fully defining the intent and the golden path is going to result in an inferior result. And so I think for most organizations, they're now realizing this. And I would say that the majority of executives, CISOs, CIOs aligned are agreeing that maybe AI is not having the impact that they expected, and potentially the risk that they have in sensitive information being posted on public models without sovereign controls is much higher than it was in the past. And so I would say the software supply chain foundationally does not change, but the way that we define the policy and very intentional around what we want certain agents to do and for what outcome does need to change. And I think that's the biggest shift in we are not using AI within organizations in the same consumerized way that we may use in our personal lives. And I think that's a really important distinction for most CISOs that I speak to today.
Yes, yeah. Not everything is Claude and ChatGPT. You've made me think about just what it was like when ChatGPT first came up, our which was kind of like the first one that kind of made a name for itself publicly, let's say, right? And I think everyone's first instinct was just, well, we can't control what goes into that, so we're just going to block it. And we kind of generally, depending on what organization you worked in, got support to do that. Yep, cool. We don't want sensitive information being used to train these things. But that's really changed now as organizations have really gone like across the board all in on AI. Like everyone's encouraged to experiment with it, use, most organizations are probably going, yep, here's our sanctioned AI models and here's who we're partnering with and here's what you can use and here's how you can use it safely. But a lot of the time I'm seeing like, I look at friends and family and all that kind of stuff, and they are just like everyone is experimenting with everything. The next big thing that comes up, everyone's diving into it. And so, yeah, I definitely hear what you say as well about that difference between how we're using it in our personal lives, but you probably just don't realize as well, like everything else that it is being used for that you can't see. To kind of help wrap us up a little bit though, if you could give one piece of practical advice to an Australian security leader, maybe one that you're talking to right now, who's being asked to enable AI for the dev team next quarter, what would it be? Assuming that most already haven't done it.
Well, yeah, I did have this conversation this morning, actually. So it is quite topical at the moment. I would say in many cases, building intelligent orchestration and having a platform engineering approach for how CISOs choose to empower their teams, their organization to use AI is really important. And I think there are three specific layers that they probably need to think about as they build that intelligent orchestration platform. Yeah, they need to focus on that data layer. They need that system of record with unified context evolving to a knowledge graph across all of their repos and merge requests and pipelines and security signals in order to reduce that context pollution. The second layer is they definitely need to focus on control and access and building out all of those agents that are specific for their outcomes and provide access controls in the similar way that they would do to the teams that have performed those tasks before them. And then being able to build out those flows and that orchestration that helps to deliver the end-to-end outcome with a very light touch but human in the loop based approach. I think the context of having inner loop versus outer loop is super important, and maybe ensuring that the more context we have consolidated within that one integrated system of record is so much more valuable to an agentic response from a quality point of view than having MCP connections on every prompt to third-party tools that may sit out in the broader ecosystem. I think the last layer is around experience. And I think many organizations have noticed that there is an influx of demand from their teams and wanting to use AI. And I think experience needs to have some guardrails around it, some control in access method. And rather than just sprawl of access to AI across any different platform that has been requested, centralizing through an AI gateway is critical. Ensuring that we define the intent of what that agent will perform and who can access it, so it's not generic anymore. And extending beyond agentic chat to provide more reasoning across all of the data and all of that system of record that we can hold within the platform. I think unifying and simplifying the approach for the practitioners is possibly one of the biggest benefits that CISOs can help the organization to realize, because it not only protects the organization, but also protects the individuals from potential risks that could occur in their day-to-day activities. And so, I like to spend a lot of time working with CISOs and helping them to build out that plan.
Are you finding that people are adopting AI gateways more broadly? Because I feel like that's something that in my conversations, a lot of people are like, we really, really want to get this in place, but they haven't quite done it yet, or they haven't convinced the organization that, like, hey, if we want to do this right, we want to do this securely and meet our AI ambitions, having this controlled path for how AI is accessed and what it can access is definitely the way to go. Are you seeing that adoption pick up?
Surprisingly, and not as many large-scale organizations are there yet. They do acknowledge that it's a gap. I think the ones that have excelled are those that have built their system of record and have simplified and consolidated how they build their software and how they shift left on security and compliance. I've worked with quite a few universities, Deakin University, one of our customers, Victoria University of Wellington, evolving that space, financial services organizations like Airwallex and Bendigo and Adelaide Bank too. I think many organizations that we speak to that have had that platform engineering approach to transformation have a much easier path to centralizing access to AI as well, and being able to have that AI gateway to centralize and provide that traceable provenance around all of the agents that may need to be used, but also being able to understand how we can maybe help evolve to give a better experience to the consumers, but also reduce that sprawl in the way that it might be accessed. So I think there is a path, but not as many organizations that I've come across have been leveraging this as yet. They're still on that journey.
Well, I guess with like a lot of these solutions, they are solving a problem that only a short period of time ago we did not know that we needed to solve, as often happens with new cybersecurity products in the market. Andrew, thank you so much. That was really, really insightful, and I think a lot to take away there from our listeners. I guess I'll let you get back to it. I know I promised the last one to be the last question, so I don't want to take too much of your time because it sounds like you are a very, very busy man. So I will end by saying, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your voice with us today.
Thank you so much too. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sanar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Popplant Productions. Please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@aisa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an AISA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An AISA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at aisa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.